with a tie. You're looking astonishing.
Of course,
Yeah,
I do this for gardening. This is my gardening gear, just my rough clothes.
Oh, that's great.
we are super happy to welcome you, Sterling, to our Nemis Academy. Thank you for coming. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And thanks to everyone who is joining right now super, super actively.
Okay, now I think it's my turn a little bit. Of course, it's my turn. Okay. Welcome, dear guests, also to a new Nemis Academy webinar. And we want to talk about food safety. We are here. It's always the same. We want to be a community and talk to each other. Listen, the last few weeks I wasn't here, right? I had so much work to do. I'm happy again to be your moderator and being a host for you for sure. We did have a few webinars lately about recalls, phages, HACCP audits, foodborne illnesses, and so on. Root cause analyzing also was great. I wasn't there, but I looked it afterwards. It was beautiful, really cool. And I hope we did learn much more. Now, what are we doing right now? We are really listening to our dear guest, Sterling Crew. Who is Sterling? I'm a pleasure to introduce you. You are chair of the Food Authenticity Network and the president of the IFST. Great. And we also do work with IFST, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
How are you doing, Sterling?
Really well, and I'm looking forward to talking to your guests and perhaps answering a few questions if it's within my power to do so.
And from where you are talking to us?
So I'm talking from Wiltshire, which is a very rural area in England. So I'm looking forward to sharing some local stories about food fraud that's happened on my doorstep as well, not just globally.
Yeah, great. And now my question to attendees from where you are coming, guys, and also drop a few lines if you hear us well, see us well, so we can start. Because I know that we normally have people from all over the world, and not just Europe, also from US, from Australia, from Asia, and all over the globe. So I'm waiting for first signs that we are visible, and then we can move on.
Yeah, I think so. There are already a lot of attendees in here and it's growing. Oh, now look, it's 48 already, and we are waiting still for more. Good to hear from you all over the world. Somehow.
Okay, people say that they hear us, so fine, and we can start. So Sterling, time is yours. You have 30 minutes of your beautiful presentation slide, and afterwards we are ready to answer your question, guys.
Okay, once again, guys, it's great to speak to you. My name is Sterling Crew. As you can see, I'm quite old. I've been in the food industry for 40 years now, and I've worked in the government. I've worked for 2 big retailers. I've worked for a big brand, Coca-Cola, and also I've worked in the field of licensing. So what I hope to bring you is somebody that's got experience of the whole food supply chain globally, and I was working in manufacturing. So I'll be looking at food fraud through those eyes. So I work for the Food Authenticity Network. I chair the brand. I'll talk a little about them and how they can help you in your work. Next slide, please, Anna.
Yes, and we are doing also.
Yeah. And what I'll try to do is give a quick history of food fraud, talk about the network, what's in it for you, how's this going to benefit you, talk about some of what's driving food fraud and some of the future challenges we need to be prepared for. So next slide, please. So when it comes to the history of food fraud, it's been around for a long time. It goes back to Roman times, since the beginning of history, as you can imagine. And in fact, olive oil, when they were looking at some historical sites, they were finding people who were committing fraud were selling something that they were selling as olive oil, but was a different oil, a cheaper oil. So it's been going along for a long time. And you can get it by subsidy fraud, is where you can try to get kind of export refunds. You can do it by avoiding hygiene requirements. So try to do fraud by not involving the legal framework. You can adulterate it by adding or subtracting items, and you can mislabel. And perhaps a good one of those might be to talk about is olive oil, which, as I say, the Romans were doing 2,000 years ago, and it is still happening today. I love olive oil. I love Italian olive oil. I love extra virgin olive oil, and I'm willing to pay for it. And because I'm willing to pay a premium, then that's a great area for a food fraudster to work in. If I could sell something that was cheaper for something that's more expensive, that's how they're making money. So olive oil is a good example. And there's been a recent report every year from the EU demonstrating olive oil fraud. I think it's interesting that actually, if you look at all the olive oil that is labeled as Italian, Italy can't produce that amount of olive oil. There's a hell of a lot of it that comes from Syria and other countries, and Spain indeed, which is cheaper. You could argue it's the same quality, but people are willing to pay the premium. You can imagine it's a big area. Just to give you an example, this is my olive oil and balsamic vinegar dispenser that you use. And I've been doing some work myself, so I've removed it from the package so people can't see the origin of it, because it's now no longer in the original package. I serve it to my guests. I've done something with the color, legal ingredients, food ingredients, I shall stress. So I've changed the color of what is a basic oil, which is pretty clear, into this greenish, lovely olive oil color. I've added a few flavors as well, because the original cheap vegetable oil didn't have that tone that you get with olive oil. And then I serve this to my guests as, you'll know this if you come around my house now, hey, I've got some brilliant Italian unique olive oil that's virgin, and then I pour it out and no one can tell the difference, or if they can, they don't tell me. So I use that as an experiment, just to show how easy it is to fool people into thinking I'm getting something that's premium, but actually I'm serving them something that's really probably a fifth of the price of the original. So that's what food fraud's about. Next slide, please. And it's great that we've got a global audience, because we have a global food network, and food fraud operates globally. I mean, it's estimated to cost the world something like $40 billion a year. In fact, some recent research came out from the UK, and in England and Scotland and Wales, they estimated that food fraud costs each person in the country £156 a year. That's just by eating fraudulent products in food, not just criminal fraud, but just food. So it shows you that it's big business. Next slide, please. So I'm going to come at it from a public health point of view. So I'm a public health advocate. I work in food safety, and you might say, well, but what's food fraud got to do with you then? Well, because I think food fraud is also associated with food safety. And if you look at 3 of the 4 largest global food fraud cases, they all had a food safety implication behind them. And to give you some examples globally, of course, there's the famous example of baby milk that was in China, where the fraudsters wanted to up the protein content of the milk, or the appearance of the protein, because they could charge a lot more for the milk. Unfortunately, they did this by substituting in melamine, and this gave the impression there was more protein, so they sold it higher, but it had a huge public health consequences. Over 50,000 people, at least, babies were hospitalized. At least there's 6 known deaths, and there may be more than that. I have connections with China, and when I visit my family over there, they're always asking me to bring baby milk, because there's also a brand damage. It damages the brand of China. It damages the brand of the Chinese food industry. So the real cost of this, I think, are measured in millions and millions and millions. And as I say, you're making people ill who are vulnerable. There's nothing worse than a baby death, I think. And in fact, there were 3 more deaths that aren't mentioned here, which were the fraudsters, who were all executed by the government. So there are strict consequences of fraud. And then another fraud, which is the biggest fraud that was conducted ever in the UK, which resulted in hundreds and hundreds of products being taken off the shelf. And this is when Sudan 1, which is not a food colouring, and it's a carcinogen, but it is used in the colouring industry. And someone in India thought that the chili powder didn't look red enough, so they unwittingly used a dye which was illegal and toxic, and that got out into the food supply chain. And as you can imagine, chili is used in a wide variety of products. So not just the chili powder that came off, but also, you know, if you bought tomato sauce that had Worcester sauce in and things like that, were all affected because they did a traceability exercise. And as I say, hundreds and hundreds of products were taken off the shelf. And this is a carcinogen, again, a public health issue as much as a fraud issue. Next slide, please. Now, look, I'm going to talk here about local because you're all thinking, oh, this is to do with global supply chains and it's global networks and big retailers and big manufacturers, but it can happen very locally as well. So here's a case, I'm sorry the picture didn't come out, and this is where a restaurant owner was jailed for 6 years over a peanut allergen customer. And what had happened is that they were selling curries, but they were saying that the curries were made with almonds, which is obviously a high value product. And what they were doing is not using almonds, but actually using peanuts instead, but still selling it as the curries have an almond base. In fact, the regulator had turned up a couple of months before, had seen this and actually told them, why have you got peanuts on site and no almonds when you claim for almonds? And unfortunately, they took no notice. And a guy went in who had a peanut allergy, but could eat almonds, asked 3 times, you just use almonds? And the waiter says, yes, all we use is almonds, high quality products. And he had an anaphylactic shock and died. So here's another example locally of how you can kill somebody with food fraud. I mean, I'm sure the restaurant didn't appreciate the risks involved, or he probably wouldn't have done it. Another couple of local cases just to show you how it happens. As I was talking earlier, I'm speaking from a small village in Wiltshire, in a rural part of England, and you think, well, what food fraud could go on there? We had 2 cases in the last 6 months in the local courts. One was a car wash, which was being used as a slaughterhouse and meat packer. So as you can imagine, you don't know where the meat is coming from, but they were completely outside the regulatory system that protects us all. And they were selling it cheaper, and we still don't know what was in the meat, really. Food fraud with a health consequence, local, not global. And then there was also a case last month where a poultry seller, and in this country, you need to have a salmonella certificate with the poultry as it's going into the market. Again, a safety measure to make sure that you're lowering the salmonella risks that are in the poultry. And what he was doing was just duplicating certificates, so just issuing certificates. And then they were found out, again, going around the regulator and having a health risk. Next slide, please. I've got the example of BRC, which I'm sure we all use the GFSI standard. I remember being in Disney at the time, and we always said you have to have a BRC certificate as step 1 on food safety. And they didn't have one. And I said, well, we can't trade unless you get one. We need to have some assurance. And I got one within 3 weeks. And I thought, wow, I've never seen anyone do that in 3 weeks before. They must be really, really good. But then that's too good to be true. So I checked the register, and funny enough, they weren't in there. When I spoke to them, they weren't BRC certified. They said I wanted a certificate, so they gave me one. They just gave me a piece of paper, and it looked exactly like the original. Food fraud again. But food fraud, we must tackle it not just for public health reasons, because it impacts upon the world economy. In fact, 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals are all affected by food fraud. Next slide, please. I'm going to dash through these slides, not so much, just so that you've got some information that you can look at a later date, and I'll give you a site that you can get these slides from. So as I say, it has a massive impact upon the world economy. And to me, it kind of, there are a lot of people working it really hard, people like yourselves who are investing in time and training to do the job right. And it is really unfair that you put all that investment in and people are trying to undermine you by not taking up the right course of action. Next slide, please. So in this country, I suppose food fraud came to its kind of height when there were people selling horse meat as beef, and that caused a big problem. It's not just the fact that people are eating meat. We don't normally eat horse meat in this country. I know it might be acceptable other places in the world. So it wasn't just that. It was the fact that because this meat had evaded the normal controls, you didn't know where it came from, this horse meat. We still don't know how much of it was eaten. We still don't know what the effects were. but it was not just a UK issue, it was a European issue. And in fact, the meat scandal was picked up in Southern Ireland when they were doing some testing. And that caused a big problem with loss of faith in the industry. And we were buying this meat from big retailers. Now, if you want confidence, you normally go to a big retailer because you know the money they invest. And a lot of things came out of that. Now, one of the big things was the Elliott report in this country, which made our system more robust. And I'll just give you some examples. Next slide, please. It's not just this country where you see meat being sold for what it's not. I think it's in Malaysia, which a large part of the population is Muslim, and they, it's very important for them to have halal meat. And people in Malaysia were found to be using horse meat and kangaroo meat and beef meat and selling it all as halal. Well, it obviously hadn't gone through the halal process, and they weren't necessarily halal types of meat. So it is a global issue. So wherever you are in the world, this, I guarantee you, is happening on your doorstep, both globally and locally. Next step, please. Next slide. So as I say, I'm chairman of the Food Authenticity Network, which was set up after the Elliott Review, where we are a body that has both government on our board and leading scientists who work in this field. Next slide, please. And you can join for free, which is a great thing. We're like a one-stop shop, we say. So all the things you're looking for on food fraud, instead of going to lots and lots of different sites, you can come to our site. The information's available. We'll also signpost you to other sites as well. And so I think this is really important. As a BRCGS requirement is that you have to demonstrate management of food fraud. And I know a lot of people have joined our site for free, easy access, and use that to demonstrate to auditors that, this is how I get my horizon scanning, this is how I get my tools. And so it's a very good way also of passing audits if you use a site similar to this. Next slide, please. I think its strength is the government involvement, to be honest with you. As I say, it's free open access resource. So we bring information from the whole of the globe because food fraud is a global issue. If something happens in the UK, it can impact India. If something happens in Australia, it can impact America. So we're all interconnected. I don't like the word food chain. You hear that a lot? I hate that word because we're a food network. We're not a chain of supply. We are a complete network of supply that is very complicated and changes now on a rapid basis as people are looking to get the best deal they can. So if you want to know about authenticity testing, if you want to know about migration, everything that you can think of related to food fraud, you'll find on this open access site. It's free to join. And we're having lots and lots of members are taking advantage of that. Next slide, please. I'll show you a QR code at the end that will help you join. As we think prevention is better than cure, so often I get involved in what's happened after the food fraud and how it's impacted on the business and how they have to recover, how it's affected their brand, how they have to do a recall. But that's too late. Prevention is better than cure, as we all say. And here, as I say, on food fraud prevention, you'll see tools, guidance, reports. You'll see policy and what the law says. You'll see standardizations. You'll understand the definitions. You'll have links to food crime units. So if you want to see the FSA's tool on how to manage a food fraud and mitigate it, all those are available in one spot. And you can pick the things that are best suited for your business, whether you're big, whether you're large, whether you're global, whether you're local, what type of products you're producing. Next slide, please. So horizon scanning, I think, is probably the most important thing that we offer. Is being prepared, is seeing what's coming up, not yesterday, not even today, but analyzing what's going on in the world so that you can predict the areas that are going to be the greatest threat. So, for instance, we saw the war in Russia, in Ukraine, completely disrupt the vegetable oil market. And as a consequence, the price was going up, there was going to be a shortage, and that's what food fraudsters look for. So we can give you some horizon scanning. When I say food fraudsters, I can just say also that organized crime has moved into this area. So we've spoken to a forensic accountant, and when you look at narcotics and food fraud, they were explaining why, if you're a criminal, it's better to go into food fraud than narcotics. You can make as much money. I mean, this is big business, and you probably have heard about the blood avocados that are in South America and how much money it's in the realms of narcotics. Yeah, it's of that nature. Look, if you get caught doing food fraud, the fines aren't big, nor are the jail sentences. If you haven't killed somebody, it's not seen as like a narcotic, and the chances of getting caught are a lot less. As you can imagine, the police and criminal forces are looking at narcotics and the crime and the violence. Not so much, even though we have a crime unit looking at food in Scotland and in England and Wales here, a specific unit. It hasn't got the same resources. And if you get caught, there's a lot lower sentence, which is important if you're doing your risk management as a criminal. Do I sell drugs or do I sell food fraud? That's a big thing. And so again, it has a certain appeal for organized crime, more so than narcotics in lots of ways. Next slide, please. Shocking as it is. And I think the trouble with a lot of these criminals is they don't appreciate the public health implications. So it's obviously not in their interest to kill people or injure people, but they just don't have the knowledge to do that. And so here's the framework we use for coordinated responses. And you can see that our organization is linked to government, which I think is very powerful. Next slide, please. So briefly, I might just talk about mitigation. So what can you do to combat food fraud? And I'll go through some just tips. But as I say, you can go to the site if you need more details. Next slide, please. Right, so if we were to talk, normally I just put one slide up if we're in a room and say, look, let me tell you 7 simple things you can do to mitigate food fraud. The biggest thing, if you have one takeaway from our discussion today, is at the bottom. Think like a criminal. That is your biggest weakness in your organization. We're all trying to do the right thing. We use HACCP, food safety management systems. We spend a lot of time trying to do the right thing for our customers. Now, we spend a lot of time thinking about food safety. All the people I've met in the food industry, they've got a highest degree of integrity. But these people aren't like us. And we think HACCP systems work. They only work if you have good actors. They don't work if you have bad actors. And so you have to put your mindset into, I'm a criminal. How am I going to make money in my organization? Is it by I'm in the supply chain, or is it because I'm in a restaurant, or is it because I'm in a manufacturer? In those environments, huge or small, you've got to think like a criminal. And it's not an easy thing to do. And the 7 simple steps that I try to say is, the first one's the most difficult, which is you recognize that food authenticity, food fraud is a risk. And I think with a vast majority of businesses, that is not recognized. Not just a risk for food safety, as I've shown you the consequences, but the risk for your brand as well. Even if it doesn't have a food safety risk, it can really damage your brand. And I think that was the biggest issue for retailers with the horsemeat scandal. It wasn't just the fact that there was a potential safety and fraud risk, but to them it was about trust in consumers, which is so important. I've worked for 2 of the retailers who were involved in the past, and both of them are very proud of their brand, and both of them, the damage to the brand from their customers and generally was immense. It affected their share prices, it affected trust. So there is a need to recognize that this is a risk. You need to map your supply work, which is where's your stuff coming from? So whether you're a restaurant or a manufacturer, or you're somewhere in the supply chain, or you're on a farm, where is your supply network? Do you know where your food is coming from? Can you map it out? So do you have a vision of, I know where this food is coming from? Because that means that you can get trust in your network. Are they trustworthy? Have I used them for a long time? Have I had a problem? Have I seen problems associated with them? So what effect you're doing is identifying the risk within your organization. From the what happens outside the door, my warehouse door, where's that coming from? And then also within the organization as well. And I can give you lots of examples where, you know, people are committing fraud in an organization. I saw it with potatoes. Potatoes were a raw material being used by a manufacturer. And what one of the people were doing was sourcing it from cheaper suppliers than the ones that they thought they were getting it from, and skimming it off the extra money, sharing with the supplier. So you get that type of fraud. Is not completely unusual to find it within the organization itself. You know, you need to assess the risks and prioritize them. So look, if I'm using eggs in this country, well, I want British Lion eggs because I know there is a assurance scheme behind them. I know that they don't have salmonella in them. But there's always a temptation, I think, to think, well, I'll just get the cheapest eggs I can. If I'm hospitality and restaurants, I'll just buy the cheapest. You don't sure where they come from. They're not marked in any way. And then you take on the risk of, well, I don't know the supply chain. But if you use British Lion, you know the provenance behind it. You know the 700 audit standards. You know the welfare standards. So it is about risk. So if you're buying an egg, you can reduce the risk of food fraud and food safety by simply making the decision to go to British Lion rather than otherwise. Costs a bit more, but then you've mitigated a risk. You need to have an action plan. You have to, you know, it's very similar to HACCP in many ways, isn't it? You need to have a plan, what you're going to do to mitigate those risks. You need to, you know, prioritize and what the control points are really in the organization I need to get on top of. For food fraud, not food safety, you need to track and communicate what those risks are. So you need to put them widely through the supply chain within the company. And then I'm talking about a culture. Eleanor, do you notice this little boy that's on the slide here? Pretty cute, eh? I'm hoping that some of you looked at him and said, oh, cute kid. And you can perhaps feel a connection. Well, this is actually one of my grandkids. And now maybe you think of me as not some kind of big, ugly bloke. I'm 6'6", and I could be imposing, and I can be, sometimes people are wary of me because of my size and my height. But immediately you connect with someone and say, oh, this is he's a grandfather. You're making a human connection. And we know that food safety culture is really important. Big buzzword in food safety. It's changed the whole landscape of what we do in the last 5 years. Where there is something similar in food fraud, it's about how do you create a culture where people appreciate that food fraud is a risk, and they're engaged and trained and educated and motivated to do something about it. And with all the other things that people have on their plate, it's trying to embed that within your food safety culture and your business culture. And you do that by treating people as people. And so that's why I've put that slide in. If ever I'm talking about food safety to an organization, sometimes I put that slide in and say, look, this is my grandson. Do you know he eats your product? You know, and then suddenly it's not about a series of numbers and processes and actions. Suddenly it's about people. Next slide, please. So supply network assurance, I think, is critical. I've been in the business 40 years ago and before globalization. And most of the food that I used to eat were from a farm. You could see the cows in the farm, you could see the slaughterhouse, you could see the butcher, you could see the restaurant, you could see the wheat in the fields. So the supply chain was almost within 10 miles of the village. A lot of things we used to get locally, whereas now, you know, it's likely to see, you know, meat coming from Argentina or lamb coming from Australia as anything else. And now we have a diverse range of products, you know, and so ethnic food we get from China, we get from India. So it's a lot different environment than I think we were working in before. And that brings its own risks. Next slide, please. As well as great, delicious food, there are risks. And you have to look at supply chain systems. So I could talk about this for 5 hours, but you need traceability systems. And there are some out there. We've seen block the development of blockchain, smartphone apps. You can use forensic accounting. You know, you can do mass balances. I'm sure some of you who do that. And forecasting, ways of working out how good is your supply chain. And I think sometimes people just focus on their own operation and don't think, I wonder, where's this food coming from? What assurance have I got that the food that I'm bringing in is of the right quality, safety, and I'm not exposing myself to some enormous food fraud risk. The temptation is, the economy is not in the greatest of states, and hospitality, certainly in the UK, has gone through a very tough period with COVID-19, as have manufacturers. We're still feeling a bit of that. So it's a difficult economic environment for a lot of the food sector. And there is a temptation to go cheap rather than to go for quality. But there is a cost of going cheap if you expose yourself to a massive opportunity that looks like the money is just almost unbelievable. And there might be a reason why it's almost unbelievable. Next slide, please. And there's audit certification. So a lot of what people can't have the time to go to sites, so they use the global audit certification process to get a view. And certainly it's something I use. It's got its upsides and its downsides, but certainly it's a base step for, if an auditor's been there on a third-party scheme, you have some view of what the place is like. It will certainly sift out those that can't meet the standard. And that's the Global Food Safety Initiative, which I'm sure that we're all familiar with. And it's a requirement, isn't it, for so many of us? I know when I was in retailing, it started off with, you want to have a conversation with us. First of all, make sure you're certified, and then we'll take it to the next level of assurance. And you know that the core principles are in there: safety, integrity, quality, legality. But what's also in there now is food fraud. And so if you want one of these certificates, you need to demonstrate that you understand food fraud, that you have horizon scanning tools, and you have access to tools that you can use. And as I say, you can get that from the Food Authenticity Network. Keep an eye out for the QR code and our email address coming up soon. And it also, as you know, these schemes look at HACCP, but more now we're all talking about VASAP, and more of that coming later. And it covers everything. It's agents and brokers as well, not just manufacturers. And it's promoting a food safety excellence culture. Now, you also see food safety culture in there. And if you don't have food fraud in your food safety culture, you have a gaping hole. Next slide, please. So how's it going to change for the future? Well, technology, I hope, will be our friend as well as our enemy. We've already seen the initial impacts of AI, which is great for helping against food fraud and traceability. But also criminals are not stupid. They see AI as a tool to commit fraud. And I'm sure we're going to see more of that in the future. We do a lot of lab-based testing, a lot of analyticals that are in use, and it's becoming cheaper. So when I started off in university looking at mass spec, it was in a room, and you had to have a PhD to use it 40 years ago, and we all thought it was some type of magic. Now you can get one that's in your hand, as you see here, mass spec. You can just point it at someone. You don't have to be highly trained, and it will simply tell you, is it in spec or not? And if it's out of spec, well, then you can send it for further analysis. But this is a really cheap way of doing lots and lots of testing. You don't have to hire highly trained people. So there's a lot more testing. But testing is only good if it fits into a program, a mitigation program. So look for that. Lots of fit for purpose, validated standardized methods out there as well. So in the past, we didn't know what test to use to look for A or B. Now we are much better at that. Again, the Food Authenticity Network is global leaders in this field. And I think consumers generally can have greater trust in the food they buy. So when we think it's getting better or worse, I think there are more controls in place than we've ever had to try to protect our customers. Next slide, please. And as we're talking now, it's not parochial. It's not Indians speaking to Indians. It's not Chinese speaking to Chinese, or Americans speaking to Americans, or English people speaking to English people. We're all talking now. We're global. I think that brings a lot more diversity of view and greater insights. So a quick end on the tools. There's VASAP, Vulnerability Assessment, which is a great system to use. You can have it accredited to give confidence for yourself and for your teams that you're doing the right thing. Very similar to HACCP. The terminology is simple, but it's looking at food fraud. One of the most interesting things is, if you get a HACCP team together and a VASAP team, they look very, 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 very different. Yeah, because the VASAP team is more about potential fraud. So you might have your security people in, your operations more looking at it that way. You might have HR in. So it is a differently focused team, and you have some different members on the team. Again, the big problem you have with ASAP is people don't think like criminals. They think, oh, somebody's made a mistake. It's that HACCP thing, isn't it? Someone's making an honest mistake and there's a consequence, and we're trying to stop that. Whereas this is deliberately getting around the system. Next slide, please. Just to tell you, there's something called PASS, which is PASS 96, which again has been produced by BSI. And it gives a great guide to protecting and defending food from deliberate attacks. So this is not just criminals, but those who might have terrorist intentions as well. So what I'm trying to say is there's lots and lots of guidance out there. It's not like it might have been 40 years ago when people said, what do? We don't know. So there's a lot of learnings. A lot of them came out of the food fraud incident with horsemeat, to be honest with you, in this country, in the UK. And next slide, please. And as I say, these are international standards. So they're just as applicable on the other side of the world as it would be for us here. So don't think, oh, it's a Western standard or an Eastern standard or an African standard. It is a global standard that's had global input. So now let me just come to the end. So this is where I'm sitting today. It's in the Cotswolds. As I say, it's a very rural part of the country. I come from London originally. It's quite a shock to come to an environment like this, and I'm still adjusting 40 years later. I'm still trying to get my head around it. People in the street say hello to you, and you think they're gonna mug you, and so I can't get used to the way that people talk to each other. Very different culture than where I'm come from. And as I say, I think I put this slide up to say, I look out of my window, I can see fields, I can see sheep, I can see cattle. I can see the harvest going on. It actually started today on corn. I can see the processor, the butcher. I can see the mill just up the road from us. And I know that the supply chain was tiny. I knew that it was local people working in there who had an investment in their community. And I can see the supply chain. Whereas now, and that gives you some confidence, whereas you don't see it if it comes from somewhere else. But as I said, I'm sitting here thinking, we're so lucky. But I've given you two incidents within 10 miles of this village of somebody essentially selling illegal meat that could be dangerous. And I've given you another side where someone's selling chicken and you look at the salmonella certificate and say, this is safe, and just issuing test certificates, making it dangerous as well as food fraud. So what I'm saying is think global and local. It's very easy to think this is a global issue. It's too big for me to impact on, but this could impact you as a person locally, and it could impact you if you have local suppliers as well. So don't think this problem comes from the other side of the world. It's just as likely as I've seen here in the last 6 months that it comes within your village. Next slide, please. I'm coming to the end. I think this is my final slide, and hopefully I'll be able to answer some of your questions. So I say, my name is Sterling Crew. I'm chair of the Food Authenticity Network. Hopefully you can see the benefits there are to you. Let's see the QR code on here. So I'll keep that QR code up in case you want to join. It's for free. It takes a lot of the hard slog out of what you need to do. You can either employ a team of people to combat food fraud, or you could use the world's premier source of food authenticity methods and mitigation information to help protect your system. And so I commend it because of the trust you can get in it, because we have so many government departments involved, so many centers of excellence, people that really understand the system who are on that board and who we liaise with. And as I say, we're connected on our board. John Spinks, if you work in the food fraud industry, you'll know from Michigan in America. He's on our board, a global expert. We have access to, one of our founders, really, Chris Elliott, who is an expert in food security. Belfast University with Michael Walker, our past chair. So we've got lots of people. Quincy, Lisa, who is from AirSafe. So we have lots and lots of people who are helping us to make sure this work is delivering what you want. So I've done my 40 minutes. Hopefully that just gives you a flavor. But we could talk for an hour on each of these subjects. On the mitigation, the 7 steps, we could talk just on that for an hour. How do we deal with each step? But hopefully it gives you a flavor. It gives you a place where you can get some of the answers. And hopefully it's of some benefit for you. So thank you for your time. And I'll take questions now and see if I can answer them. If I can't answer them now, I'll certainly know someone that can.
Thank you very much, Sterling. It was great to listen to you. I just somehow felt I was again at the university. Listening and learning. Great stuff. First, sorry there were some issues with our IT, but as I also wrote in the chat, you will get the slides, you will get the link to the webinar itself. And so I hope it's going to be good like this. Now I have a first question from Richard Haywood. What about the Tesco meat issue back in 2009? Can you?
Sorry, could you repeat that? It just broke up. What about the what issue, please?
The issue about the Tesco meat.
The Tesco meat.
Tesco.
Tesco. So let me first of all say, to declare an interest, I used to work for Tesco. I am well aware of the steps and checks that go into place in a big retailer. I'd left by the time that happened. I think if I'd have been there, it wouldn't have happened. Just joking. I do remind my colleagues of when I was there, we didn't have the problem. But if he's referring to the horse meat scandal, maybe in a way, some of it is the hamburgers that they were selling were so cheap. Amazing value. I think they were about 5p each. And there's a lot of competition to sell cheaper and cheaper food. And a drive for cheaper food sometimes drives people into networks that aren't as strong as they could be. And so I'm not speaking on behalf of Tesco or what happened at the time or any other retailer, but the price competition is a big thing that pushes food forward. And I think what happened is the supply network is so complicated. People think, well, I buy from A and I get from B, and then C gives it. But actually, if you look at that network, it started off, I think, in Romania, where someone who was packing meat bought meat from another party or beef. So it was so complicated and traceability that it was harder in those days, I think, to say, why are we buying this Romanian meat from perhaps someone that we're not sure of? Not there's a problem with Romania, but because it's so, it's not a familiar person in the supply chain. And so I think it was a terrible thing. And people don't talk about the health aspects, and I'm more worried about that than anything else. It affected people's trust. People used to phone me up and say, "Oh God, my child has eaten some meat, and I've been on the news, and I hear that it's horse meat. Is it safe, Sterling? Should I take my child to a doctor?" So that type of level, you think that's what consumers think. Does my child need to have a doctor? But I think the good thing that's come out of it is we're more robust now because of the Elliott report, guys. So the things we have now are really a lot stronger. And when we went through COVID, I think the extra robust, strong system helped us then with a supply chain that was moving because of COVID. A lot of good people were working hard. It wasn't just people being lazy and not wanting it. And sometimes these things happen, but less likely now, I hope. I hope that answered the question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I have another one. Has the FAN identified a global index or a resource that provides an overview, a top-line view of food fraud prevalence in various countries across the globe?
Yeah, and I meant to show a slide. I had so many slides, but there is a slide that shows you working with other partners where the incidents are coming from. So it's on flags. In fact, I was in Mexico last month, and of course they're interested in food fraud, but they're really interested in what's happening in South America, Sterling. So I was able to put up a slide that had all the countries in South America with all the reports. And what was interesting is that the people in those countries hadn't heard of some of the food fraud. So someone said, hang on a minute, I come from Colombia. I see my flag up there, and I didn't know that was going on. So you can get access to other systems that will show you what's going on in your country. I ran into a problem when I did this conference. Number one, I couldn't spell Columbus properly, and I had to realize how passionate Colombians are about using a U or an O. Okay. So it's very controversial. And then I got two flags mixed up. So I think I had Peru was Cuban flag and Cuba was Peru, and that didn't go down well either. I wasn't trying to commit fraud, but
understandable. Oh, great, super. Another question, Sterling. Many producers find it difficult to get started with VASAP. I know that because the raw material portfolios can be very huge. Any advice from you with your experience how to get started?
Yeah, and we have, I've worked for Coca-Cola. I've mentioned I work for Tesco. I work for big global organizations, but appreciate, the vast majority of producers are small outfits, small and medium enterprises, and they don't have that resource. But I do think it is either getting somebody in to help you, give you some guidance, or it's how you prioritize the risk. You can't do everything. So VASAP is not, well, I'm going to do everything there is, because you can't. But what you can't do is prioritize. VASAP will encourage you to do that, is to identify the risks, identify what are those points that if you lose control on, you're exposing the business. So it's a bit like a prerequisite program with HACCP. So you have your prerequisites, but like HACCP focuses you on, well, you have to get this right. And I think that's the great thing about VASAP. It's really written in plain language. And if you're used to HACCP, you'll think, well, someone's just done HACCP and crossed out HACCP and put an extra letter in there. So I would assure people, have a look at it. Go to the site, there's some information. It's not as complicated as it sounds. And try to prioritize and identify the real risks in your organization, whether that's a product, where are you buying it from? Why is it at that price? I go on about olive oil just only because I eat a lot of it. But for me, it's olive oil. It's used by lots of people. All oils are. And if you see the fluctuation in the marketplace, it will give you an idea. And how do you know this oil? If I gave it to you now, I bet I could fool you and say, hey, do you want some extra virgin Italian oil? But it's your analysis. So if someone came down with a mass spec and just looked at it, and it's a high risk product for fraud, one of them, and like honey, you can analyze that within a second, and it will tell you, oh, that's not olive oil. So it's about risk assessment. I would say that big dollop of common sense. Think like a criminal. If you're a criminal, what would you do? And focus on the biggest risk. Don't get caught up into the small risks.
Yeah, well, yes, you're right. Here is somebody asking you for your personal opinion. Talking about crime. You said that the probability of fraudster to get caught is low and the charges are low as well. So why didn't it change, and what is needed for the change in your opinion?
Well, I think it's a cultural thing. Many countries have different views of culture. Some people have come up to me and said, yeah, but where's the victim? Now, if I give you olive oil, and so I keep mentioning it because it's a passionate product of mine, where's the victim, Sterling? If you've got oil and you think it's olive oil and it's cheap, then where's the victim? What they don't see is the consequences, the potential safety consequences, and criminality. You're funding criminal activity. So I think that's a big issue. Did I cover the question, or was there something?
Yeah, I think so. Arne, maybe it's okay for you.
Oh, no, Arnie. Well, perhaps there was something else behind it. Can you repeat the question just to make sure? I have to do a good job for Arnie because I know.
Good.
Okay. Sure.
Let's see. You said that the probability for fraudster to get caught is low. Yeah. Oh no, now that low, and charges are low as well.
Absolutely.
This is basically the same that Andy Morling, former head of NFA crime unit, said. So Absolutely. Why didn't change it?
Well, we're not going to change food fraud because it's been going on for 2,000 years, and we could do this again in another 2,000 years. It's mitigating. I just don't think it had the visibility. We have a national food crime unit both in Scotland and in the Food Standards Agency. That didn't exist until we had a horse meat problem. But now we've got policemen. They're policemen. They're not health inspectors. And so policemen are investigating it as a crime. So there are people out there looking for criminals. And because of globalization, suddenly you can make a lot more money. And I'm not exaggerating. When I went to a forensic accountant and asked them their view, and they're the people that are saying, well, actually, if you look at the dynamics of this, you can make more money. And criminals, I think, are drawn to money, and they're drawn, like all of us are, to low risk. And they perceive food fraud as low risk on getting caught, because there aren't there many people looking for it. Mm-hmm. We don't have as many regulators in this country as we used to. We have a problem. So if I saw staying from the UK, there's less regulators looking for it. So food fraudsters love that. And I just think, if you get caught around, I've seen the sentences that are being passed, and I appreciate they're not murderers, and then they're not, but the sentences are, it's very, very rare for someone to get a custodial sentence. I could commit food fraud probably tomorrow. I worked out a way. I think I can make about 100 grand, and if I get caught, I'll get a slap on the wrist. Mm-hmm. But I won't get a custodial sentence. So that's the way people think. I'm just not going to get caught. If I'm going to get caught, I'm not going to do it. But the chances of getting caught are so remote. Look at all the money I can make, and when they catch me, I'll have a nasty day in court. But I'm not going to go to jail for 10 years. Well, I think those are the dynamics of why people are doing it.
Okay, there is we have a few questions, Sterling. Do you have any specific food materials in Horizon Scan in top 3 for this year, from your point of view?
Yeah, and they're quite common. They rarely change, but and we heard Chris Elliott's report as well recently, and his recent article. Vegetable oils are up there by the nature of what's going on. So oils, it's really easy to do a quick substitution. This olive oil comes from Syria, and it doesn't come from Italy, and I put Italy on the label. It's a very easy substitution, and it's always up there, olive oil. Honey is always quite high. Because again, I will pay premium for a great honey, and it's very difficult. And there's a lot of debate over how can you tell where the honey comes from. And a lot of people are just putting glucose in, synthetic, normal glucose, and whether it's natural glucose or synthetic glucose, it's not an easy test to do. And wine alcohol is always up there, because of the value, and because people appreciate provenance. And sometimes I wonder, all depends where you buy it from. As I say, that's important, but I'm sure I like Chateau Moussard from Lebanon, which is my favorite wine. It's absolutely beautiful. You haven't had it and you think, why is it from Lebanon? That's a bit suspicious. It's a great wine producing region, but because it's so, it's expensive because it's a great wine. Now, if you were a food fraudster, you would move in there, get a lesser wine, duplicate the labels, and do a bit of traceability, confusion, and you go get ahead with it. So they're the big 3, I would suggest. But maybe and you'll see not just the big 3, but you see the top 10, and what countries they come from. So it's about country as well as product.
Mm-hmm. Here's just a question from my side on this topic right now. I mean, you are also the president of IFST, right?
Yeah.
Is there also some kind of a leverage technologies like AI to improve the detection and prevention of food fraud?
So I would say that you haven't set me up for that question, but I did produce an article on exactly that subject in the IFST magazine, which is available online for free. So anyone who, whatever part of the world are, just put IFST into a search engine, Institute of Food Science and Technology. You'll go to our site. There's a fantastic knowledge hub. So if you think about allergens or fraud or food safety, all those information is free because we're a charity as well as a professional body. And also, if you go to not this issue, which is coming out in September, the last issue, I think it is, there's an article I've written on artificial intelligence, what are the great benefits this is going to bring.
Mhm.
Also, we have to be careful that we get something we want and not something we don't want. So it's great for the food industry in some ways, but it will impact people's careers. I'm not sure if I'll be employed in the future. You won't need an independent scientific regulatory advisor to help you. You'll just go to AI. And people are using it more and more and getting, it's the confidence level we're not at yet. But there are a lot of us online here that I'm sure will be thinking, how will it impact our work?
Yeah, right. Wow. Oh, I will go to the IFST web afterwards right away for sure. Still another question. I think this is something for FAN. Do you have inspection service especially for food fraud, or is it food safety inspection service?
That's a very, very good question, actually. So we don't get involved in doing the do. So we don't do inspections. We can give advice, but where our whole purpose is to be a center of expertise that people can go to, and we signpost. So if you wanted an inspection service, we can signpost those. If you want which laboratory in the world does this test on this product, I can trust, because you know what analysts are like. It's about the way you do the test and what you're testing for and how you interpret the test is as important as do you have the equipment. And so it gives those people an idea of, trusted organizations. So we are, as I say, we're not a profitable body. We are a public-private organization. We started off as a government body. And so our intention really is to do good. Yeah, so we're not there to do anything else. We're not there to make money, although we do have sponsorship. We're there to help the sector to do good. And we're very popular globally now, where people think, oh, I need to know this answer. Do I go pay a consultant £1,000, or do I go to the fan site and is the answer already there? I want to conduct this test, or I want to use VASAP, or I want to, all that information is sitting there for you for nothing. You need to join.
Yeah, I will join. No problem at all. Let's talk about the weather changing. Here's a good question. With weather continuing to change and becoming more unpredictable, with this affecting prices for raw ingredients, thinking like a criminal, is this opening up more chances for criminals to exploit?
Wow, what a terrific question. I must say, some very intelligent people online, they're coming up with great questions. I think climate change is the biggest crisis facing us globally. I generally believe that. And what we're seeing, and we're already seeing it in countries like Spain, is that they're not producing the food they used to produce. England is becoming hotter. We're quite a great wine producer now. We've got just the conditions as it's getting warmer. And what we're seeing is the supply network being disrupted. So traditional places of producing products, I think, will change. So you might go to new suppliers, always a risk. And I think we'll start to see shortages as well. And immediately there's a shortage. Now, if I'm a criminal, I'm thinking, I'll go to where the shortages are, not where there's lots and lots of food and it's cheap. Why am I going to make money? I want to go to the area where there's a war, or the climate change, as this person has so wisely identified, is going to cause a problem for the future. And I know if this country can't produce the crops and other countries can't either, wow, it's a great place to look for making money.
Right. Criminals.
Criminal. Like a criminal.
Your sentence, really. I will be a criminal somehow. I think just one more question. It's I'm interested also a little bit in plant-based food. Do you know something now on food fraud for plant-based food? Is there something going on?
I haven't seen any, but as you say, I think it's because it's still a relatively small market. But as it's getting bigger and bigger, as we've seen certainly within Europe, then I think the fraudsters will start to think, is there a way that we could do this? Obviously, there's a premium on plant-based food. What I have seen is more confusion than fraud is that people that don't understand plant-based. And they don't realize, for instance, that you can have a vegan milk that contains milk. Because there's no definition of vegetarian or vegan, there is an ignorance that people think, oh, they make assumptions, but actually, in fact, non-dairy milk can have milk in it. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of issues like that, I think, in what's in plant-based, but I see no reason why they shouldn't be exposed to the same type of fraud activity once it becomes worthwhile for the criminal. For instance,
yeah,
you want me to send you some extra virgin Italian oil with some balsamic vinegar? I'll sell it to you if you like, because there's not much of it around.
Okay. Okay. Well, wow. I could listen hours for you at you, Sterling. But our time is up, and if there are more questions, we'll write to you, Sterling, and the answer I will give them back to the audience, right? Yes, Alina says yes, for sure. Thank you very much, Sterling. It was very interesting to listen to you, learn from you. Knowing now FAN. It's good to know now. And maybe just to tell to everybody, stay tuned, stay with us. We do have a lot more to come on. In 2 weeks' time, more or less, 3rd of September, our next webinar. There will be Sarah Deckers from Beko Technologies, and there we were talking about compressed air in productions. So our community, we are trying to get bigger, and bigger. And Sterling, you are a part of it.
Thank you very much. It's great to join you today. Thank you for the intelligent questions. It got me. And it's great to tie up with the community. I hope to participate in the future.
Okay. Thanks to all, and have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Have a safe day.